November 11th, 2025, 6:19 in the morning. About 140 nautical miles north of Venezuela's coastline, the USS Gerald R. Ford CVN-78 moved steadily through the Caribbean Sea. On its deck sat 75 combat aircraft, while more than 4,000 sailors remained at their posts. Suddenly, radar operators detected two incoming contacts. Speed, 430 knots. Low altitude, no transponder signals, no radio communication. The approaching aircraft were Venezuelan jets, heading straight toward nearly $97 billion worth of American naval capability. Four Venezuelan fighters, together worth less than $200 million and carrying no live weapons, were about to confront the most powerful warship ever constructed. Not with missiles or bombs, but with bold maneuvering and high-definition cameras. The American side did not open fire. The Venezuelan pilots captured their footage, and in that moment, the nature of modern confrontation seemed to shift, from steel and explosives to images and perception. At 6:15, the carrier's AN/SPY-4 radar registered the first contact, bearing 285 degrees, distance 62 nautical miles, speed 430 knots, altitude 8,000 feet, and descending quickly. Just 23 seconds later, a second contact appeared. The aircraft maintained formation, spaced 3.1 nautical miles apart, both flying directly toward the carrier. The radar signature indicated twin-engine fighters with an approximate radar cross-section of 14 square meters. No fire control radars were active, no missile guidance signals, only navigation radar and encrypted military communications. In other words, the aircraft were clearly announcing their presence. They were not preparing for an immediate strike. Rear Admiral Patricia Chen now faced a decision that would shape the next 17 minutes. The Ford strike group had enough firepower to eliminate every aircraft in Venezuela's inventory. Two Arleigh Burke-class destroyer vessels escorted the carrier, each equipped with 96 vertical launch cells. To starboard sailed the cruiser USS Gettysburg, CG-64. The combat computer recommended launching 4 SM-2 missile interceptors at a distance of 50 nautical miles. Estimated success probability, 97%. Cost per missile, about $2.1 million. Admiral Chen chose another path. All weapon systems stand by. Weapons tight, launch the alert fighters. Weapons tight meant the strike group could track targets, but not fire unless directly ordered. The RIM-116 rolling airframe missile launchers remained on standby, even though each carried 21 interceptors. The escort destroyers held their missiles despite having optimal firing solutions. The carrier group wasn't unprotected. It was making a deliberate decision. At 6:17, two FA-18E Super Hornet aircraft launched from the carrier's electromagnetic catapult system, accelerating from 0 to 165 miles per hour in just over 2 seconds. Each jet carried a full air-to-air loadout. Together, they represented about $143 million in aircraft, compared with roughly $84 million for the two approaching Venezuelan fighters. The numbers behind deterrence were obvious, but deterrence works only when both sides operate by the same expectations. By 6:19, the Venezuelan jets descended below 2,000 feet, dropping at nearly 7,000 feet per minute. Intelligence identified them as Sukhoi Su-30 MKV aircraft, delivered under a $3.2 billion defense contract. No air-to-air missiles, no bombs, no gun pods. Instead, high-definition recording equipment occupied the weapon mounts. Infrared scans showed inactive hardpoints. Electronic sensors detected no targeting radars. The jets were flying low, fast, and provocatively, but not in attack configuration. They were documenting everything. At 6:21, radar operators detected two more contacts approaching from bearing 217 degrees, 38 nautical miles away. Venezuela had now committed 4 aircraft. The second pair approached from another direction, forcing the strike group to split its defensive focus. Admiral Chen's voice carried through the Combat Information Center. All stations maintain weapons tight. Launch 2 additional Hornets. General quarters. The ship's alarm sounded across the carrier. 4,000 sailors rushed to battle stations. The escort destroyers adjusted position. The cruiser shifted to guard the southern approach. Exactly the response the Venezuelan pilots wanted was now unfolding. Reaction times, defensive posture, rules of engagement, every detail captured by aircraft that cost less than a single interceptor missile. And still, the Americans chose not to fire. At 6:23, the lead Su-30 suddenly banked sharply left. Its wing tilted vertical, the nose dropped 38 degrees, and the jet rolled inverted before diving toward the Ford's island superstructure. Descent angle, 43 degrees. Closing speed, 540 knots. Estimated time to closest approach, just over 8 seconds. Every defensive system locked on instantly. The rolling airframe missile launchers turned toward the target. The phalanx close-in systems tracked the aircraft with their 20mm rotary cannons ready. Fire control radars illuminated the Su-30 with enough energy to trigger every warning receiver in the cockpit. For 6 long seconds, the Venezuelan pilot flew directly toward one of the most advanced air defense networks ever assembled. Nothing fired. Admiral Chen held the order. Maintain weapons tight. Do not engage. At roughly 400 meters, the Su-30 pulled up sharply, close enough that sailors on deck could clearly see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. The blast of jet wash rattled loose equipment and triggered vibration sensors across the carrier. One ordnance technician later said he could read the serial number on the aircraft's fuselage. The second jet repeated the maneuver, this time even closer. The force of the engines activated automatic fire suppression systems inside the hangar bay. By 6:25, the second pair of Venezuelan jets broke formation and split apart. One aircraft climbed sharply to 12,000 feet, while the other descended to just 300 feet above the water. The higher jet angled toward the destroyer USS Thomas Hudner, DDG-116, while the low-flying aircraft accelerated toward the carrier's stern, slipping between the ships at an altitude that had been considered unsafe since the 1970s. The Aegis combat system immediately locked onto the targets. Fire control solutions appeared across the displays. The system recommended launching 6 interceptors, giving a calculated 99% success rate. Estimated cost, $12.6 million. Admiral Chen's decision did not change. Hold fire. The low jet roared past the stern of the USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, at a distance of about 280 meters. The high jet leveled out roughly 500 meters above the Hudner. Moments later, all 4 Venezuelan aircraft regrouped, forming a diamond formation before turning south. From first detection to departure, the entire encounter lasted 17 minutes. Total ammunition used, 0. Yet the cameras told another story. The Venezuelan jets had recorded more than 40 minutes of footage showing their fighters maneuvering around America's most powerful warship while it chose not to fire. Within 38 minutes, edited clips appeared on Venezuelan state television. The narration claimed that Venezuelan pilots had forced the American carrier to withdraw under the threat of an attack. The video quickly spread across social platforms throughout Latin America. Government accounts amplified it. Nationalist groups celebrated it. Within 24 hours, the video reached more than 17 million views. The reality looked very different. Navigation data showed the carrier never changed its course. Ship logs confirmed constant speed and heading. The strike group continued its patrol for another 96 hours, passing within 12 nautical miles of Venezuela 4 additional times. Aircraft launched on schedule. Escort ships held their positions. But in the age of cameras and viral clips, perception can travel faster than facts. From Washington's perspective, the situation became a test of discipline under pressure. The Pentagon described the maneuvers as unsafe and unprofessional, but noted that no defensive action had been required. In simple terms, Venezuela gained dramatic footage, while the United States confirmed that Caracas was willing to take significant risks for political messaging. The question remained, why accept such a dangerous gamble? At the time, Venezuela's economy had shrunk by roughly 14% over a 20-month period. International sanctions had frozen about $52 billion in assets. Inflation had climbed to around 530%. The government of Nicolas Maduro was facing food shortages, blackouts, and increasing political pressure. A symbolic victory could redirect attention. A viral video required no ammunition, but it carried enormous propaganda value. Within 72 hours, the footage approached 28 million views. Officials claimed the event demonstrated military readiness. Some observers noted a temporary surge in nationalist sentiment, along with a brief increase in approval ratings. The American side faced a completely different calculation. Engaging unarmed aircraft could have triggered a serious international incident. A downed jet near coastal areas could have led to civilian casualties. Diplomatic fallout might have lasted weeks, possibly accompanied by regional criticism. Destroyed Venezuelan aircraft could have given Maduro exactly the narrative he needed. By holding fire, the carrier group accepted the propaganda hit, but avoided escalation and maintained freedom of operation. In that sense, the USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, demonstrated that carrier strength is not only about weapons, it is also about the ability to remain on mission despite provocation, absorbing political theater without losing strategic focus. The Venezuelan pilots returned to Generalissimo Francisco de Miranda Air Base and were welcomed as national heroes. State media broadcast interviews and debriefings. Commendations were handed out. 8 weeks later, the Ford's crew returned to Norfolk. There were no major headlines, no medals for holding fire, and no public celebration for staying disciplined. But restraint can be the hardest decision in any confrontation. Launching weapons is easy. Choosing not to act when every alarm and instinct pushes the other way requires a different kind of discipline. The kind that considers long-term consequences. The kind that weighs political impact against tactical advantage. The kind that recognizes that modern conflict is not always decided by missiles. At 6:42 that morning, Admiral Chen stood on the flag bridge watching the horizon. The carrier continued northeast at 22 knots. Flight operations resumed. Escort ships returned to their patrol patterns. Meanwhile, in Caracas, a media team was already editing the footage into the next viral clip. The event revealed weaknesses on both sides. For Venezuela, the gamble worked domestically but exposed serious risks. If the Americans had responded with force, 4 fighters, together worth about $84 million, and their pilots could have been lost within seconds. The Sukhoi Su-30 MKV had little protection against the layered air defenses surrounding the carrier group. Their steep dive maneuvers placed the aircraft in extremely vulnerable positions, descending quickly with no long-range weapons and limited ability to change course once committed. In reality, those maneuvers were incredibly dangerous. It looked like bold flying, but in practice it was closer to a one-way gamble masked as confidence. The only reason those pilots made it home safely was because the American side chose restraint. For the United States, the moment revealed a different problem: the limits of traditional deterrence in the information age. The USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, carried enough firepower to overwhelm Venezuela's entire air force if necessary. Yet none of that power stopped 4 unarmed jets from racing past the carrier and claiming a public relations victory online. Deterrence works when the other side values survival more than spectacle. In this case, survival wasn't the primary objective. The real objective was the story, and the story was written in Caracas. Analysts later pointed out that this encounter followed a broader global pattern. Similar close encounters have happened in several regions. Chinese fighters approaching American reconnaissance planes over the South China Sea, Russian aircraft intercepting NATO patrols over the Baltic, and Iranian fast boats maneuvering near U.S. ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The method is familiar. Fly close, record everything, release the footage, claim victory regardless of what actually happened. It reflects a deeper strategic shift. In a direct military confrontation, a smaller force would almost certainly lose. But in the world of information warfare, a carefully staged moment can create an asymmetric advantage. A single viral clip can shape domestic opinion, energize supporters, and introduce doubt about an opponent's resolve. The goal is no longer to win the engagement itself. The goal is to win the algorithm. By the time the carrier group eventually returned to Norfolk, the incident had already faded from American news coverage. Meanwhile, Venezuelan state media continued replaying the footage for weeks. One broadcast suggested that aircraft carriers were vulnerable. Another claimed that American escort ships had been forced to pull away. Neither claim matched the actual events. But in the world of information battles, perception can matter more than accuracy. The entire situation came down to a simple equation. Venezuela spent nothing on ammunition and gained tens of millions of views. The United States also spent nothing on ammunition and maintained freedom of navigation. One side gained dramatic footage that played repeatedly on television and social media. The other remained on mission and completed its patrol without escalation. Which side won depends entirely on how victory is defined. The carrier group demonstrated that American naval forces can endure intense provocation without abandoning their mission. It showed that discipline and restraint are strategic choices, not signs of weakness. And it proved that even the most advanced weapons require judgment about when not to use them. But the Venezuelan side demonstrated something as well. In the age of social media, you don't always need to disable a carrier to challenge it. Sometimes it's enough to create the impression that you could have. You don't need advanced weapons to challenge a global superpower. Sometimes cameras, timing, and a willingness to take risks for a few seconds of dramatic footage can achieve the effect. Hardware can be countered with more hardware. Narratives, however, can only be countered with stronger narratives, and sometimes the side that fires first ends up losing the larger story. Naval power still matters when the shooting starts, but today it also matters when the cameras are rolling and when they finally turn off. Because sometimes the hardest battle to win is the one where no shot is fired.